Sophia Williams stepped into the elegant confines of Maison Luxe, her heels clicking softly on the gleaming marble floors. The restaurant hummed with quiet sophistication, soft murmurs of conversation intertwined with the clinking of glasses and the gentle strains of piano music. Dim lighting cast a warm glow across the room, enhancing the upscale ambiance. It was a place she and her husband Adrien often frequented, one that usually felt like a haven of luxury. But tonight, something felt off. Sophia had arrived ahead of Adrien, who was delayed by a meeting across town. He had urged her to go ahead and settle in, assuring her he wouldn't be long. But now, sitting at a corner table by herself, she wondered if it had been the right choice. Her unease grew as she glanced around, taking in the well-dressed patrons filling the restaurant. Their laughter blended seamlessly with the music, creating an air of relaxed sophistication. As she adjusted her seat, a waiter approached. He was tall, blonde, and wore the black and white uniform of the restaurant. His name tag read Liam. But instead of greeting her with the usual warmth Maison Luxe was known for, he barely glanced her way. "Ready to order?" he asked flatly, his tone devoid of friendliness. Sophia blinked, surprised by his abruptness. "I'll just have some water for now," she replied evenly, gesturing to the empty table in front of her. "I'll order in a little bit." Liam scribbled something in his notepad, still avoiding her gaze. "Sure." He turned and walked away without another word. Sophia's eyes followed him as he moved across the room to another table, where a middle-aged couple sat. Their designer outfits and radiant smiles seemed to invite his full attention. Liam greeted them with a laugh, refilled their glasses, and lingered for some light conversation. His demeanor was warm and attentive, a stark contrast to how he had treated her. Sophia tried to brush off the encounter. Maybe he's just having a rough day, she thought, but as the minutes ticked by, the feeling of unease in her stomach grew heavier. Liam continued to make his rounds, stopping at other tables to deliver dishes and chat with diners. Yet, he didn't so much as glance in her direction. She had dined at Maison Luxe many times before with Adrien, and the service was always impeccable. Tonight, however, felt different. Her phone buzzed, breaking her train of thought. It was a message from Adrien. "Running a little late, love. Order whatever you like. Be there soon." Sophia typed a quick reply, assuring him it was fine, and set her phone down. Looking up, she spotted Liam serving a lively group seated by the large windows. He poured wine, placed plates in front of them with precision, and shared a laugh with the diners. Still, her glass of water had yet to arrive. Crossing her arms, Sophia felt frustration creep in, replacing the initial unease. Something wasn't right. She scanned the restaurant again, noting the seamless service flowing to every other table but hers. The knot of tension in her chest tightened. She waved down another server, a young woman named Ella, who had served them in the past and always seemed friendly. Ella approached quickly, her expression polite. "Excuse me," Sophia said, keeping her tone calm but firm. "I've been waiting for some water for a while now. Could you bring me a glass, please?" Ella's eyes widened in surprise, and an apologetic look crossed her face. "Oh, I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'll get it right away." She hurried off toward the bar. Sophia sat back in her chair, trying to shake off the tension. It wasn't about the water. It was something deeper, something familiar yet unspoken. She could feel the occasional glance from other diners, their curiosity flickering before they turned back to their conversations. When Ella returned with the glass of water, Sophia offered a quiet, "Thank you." But as she sipped, her frustration lingered. Watching Liam glide between tables with an ease he hadn't afforded her, she knew this was about more than just inattentive service. This felt deliberate. Sophia tried to push away the uneasy feeling that had settled in her chest. It was a sensation she knew too well, one that carried the weight of countless moments like this. Still, she reminded herself to wait, holding out hope that the service she expected would eventually come. When Ella returned with a glass of water, Sophia gave her a quiet, polite, "Thank you." She watched as Liam, the blonde waiter, continued moving effortlessly between tables, weaving through the room as though she didn't exist. Sophia took a sip of the cold water, the sound of ice clinking against the glass a small distraction. But the refreshing taste did little to cool her mounting frustration. Whatever was happening tonight, it wasn't just a case of a server having an off day. Her gaze followed Liam as he moved gracefully from table to table. He refilled glasses, delivered plates with a flourish, and engaged in cheerful conversations with the diners. His smile was warm and inviting, except when it came to her. The more Sophia watched, the more certain she became. This wasn't about being understaffed or an innocent oversight. This was something intentional. Her fingers tapped softly against the edge of her glass as she wrestled with the decision of what to do next. Was she imagining things? Overreacting? That familiar doubt crept in, whispering that maybe she should let it go. She had been in situations like this enough to know how easily her frustrations could be dismissed. But the stark difference in treatment gnawed at her, refusing to be ignored. Minutes stretched into 20, and Liam still hadn't returned to take her order. The restaurant was noticeably busier now, but Sophia saw no signs that he was struggling to keep up. In fact, he seemed to be thriving, handling the new arrivals with the same charm and energy he had shown all evening, just not to her. At a nearby table, a group of diners had just been seated. Within moments, Liam was there, all smiles, taking their orders with ease. The knot of frustration in Sophia's chest tightened as her stomach growled, a sharp reminder that she hadn't even had the chance to order. Straightening in her chair, Sophia raised her hand slightly, hoping to catch Liam's attention. His eyes flicked past her without acknowledgement, and he turned, disappearing into the kitchen. Sophia pressed her lips into a thin line, her patience wearing dangerously thin. Glancing at her phone, she checked for any updates from Adrien, wishing he would arrive soon. Taking a deep breath, she decided she'd had enough. The next time Liam appeared from the kitchen, Sophia raised her hand again, this time higher, with a firm determination. "Excuse me," she called, her voice louder than before, carrying an unmistakable edge. Liam paused, his expression blank as he turned toward her. He walked over, and for a fleeting moment, Sophia thought she might have been mistaken about his intentions. Perhaps he really hadn't noticed her before. But as he stopped at her table, the look in his eyes quickly erased that hope. "What can I get you?" Liam asked flatly, his tone devoid of the warmth he had offered every other table. Sophia blinked, her frustration bubbling closer to the surface. "I'd like to place my order, please. I've been waiting for quite some time." Liam shrugged, his body language indifferent. "We've been busy," he replied. Sophia arched an eyebrow, disbelief flashing across her face. Her eyes swept over the restaurant, taking in the smooth flow of service to every table but hers. "Busy," she echoed, keeping her tone even. "I've noticed you've been able to attend to the other tables without any trouble. Is there a reason I've been sitting here for 30 minutes without my order being taken?" Liam shifted uncomfortably, his gaze narrowing slightly. "Maybe you're just being sensitive," he muttered. Sophia's grip tightened on her glass, but she refused to let her emotions get the better of her. She had heard variations of that line before, a dismissive tactic meant to invalidate her experiences. Her voice remained calm, though steel edged her words. "Sensitive?" she repeated. "I'm simply asking for the same level of service you've given to everyone else tonight. That's not sensitivity. That's basic respect." Liam's expression hardened, and for a moment silence hung between them like a taut string. Sophia held his gaze, determined not to let him dismiss her concerns. This wasn't just about a slow meal or poor service anymore. It was about something deeper, something she wasn't about to ignore. Sophia's tone remained steady, but the edge in her voice was undeniable. "Sensitive?" she repeated sharply. "I'm asking for the same service you're giving to every other customer here. That's not sensitivity, that's a basic expectation of respect." Liam sighed heavily, his posture stiffening, as though she were inconveniencing him. "Look, we're short-staffed tonight, and there's a lot going on," he replied dismissively. "I'll take your order, but if you're going to accuse me of—" "I'm not accusing you of anything," Sophia interjected firmly, her gaze unwavering. "I'm simply pointing out how differently you've treated me compared to everyone else in this restaurant, and I think you know exactly what I'm talking about." For a moment, Liam said nothing. His jaw tightened, his mouth flattening into a thin, cold line. Without another word, he pulled out his notepad. "What do you want to order?" he asked, his tone void of any warmth. "The house special," Sophia replied, her voice calm but unyielding. Liam jotted it down quickly, then turned and walked away, offering no acknowledgement or assurance. Sophia watched him retreat, a simmering mix of frustration and indignation building inside her. This wasn't the first time she'd encountered such behavior. The kind of subtle, almost deniable mistreatment that people often dismissed as accidental or circumstantial. But tonight, it was undeniable and infuriating. Sophia leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly in an effort to calm herself. Her fingers tapped rhythmically against her phone, itching to text Adrien, but she resisted. He would be here soon, and she didn't want to burden him just yet. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was far from over. The minutes dragged on, Liam didn't return, and Sophia remained stuck in an invisible bubble, ignored and isolated despite the bustling restaurant around her. She glanced at her watch. It had been nearly 45 minutes since Liam had taken her order. Yet, there was no food, no updates, and no sign of him. Nearby, the soft clinking of plates and lively conversations continued. Waitstaff bustled efficiently between tables, delivering steaming dishes and topping off glasses. Everything seemed perfect, except at her table. A sense of disbelief began to wash over Sophia. How could someone in a restaurant like this, renowned for its flawless service, treat her so poorly and think they could get away with it? Her patience finally snapped. Spotting Ella, the waitress who had brought her water earlier, Sophia raised her hand to flag her down. Ella came over quickly, her expression immediately concerned. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" Ella asked, her voice laced with genuine worry. Sophia sighed, her frustration evident, but her tone controlled. "I've been waiting for over an hour now," she explained. "I ordered the house special, but I still haven't received my food. Could you check with the kitchen for me, please?" Ella's eyes widened, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Oh no, that's definitely not normal," she said hurriedly. "Let me see what's going on. I'm so sorry for the delay." Ella rushed off toward the kitchen, leaving Sophia alone to stew in her growing anger. Her jaw tightened as she watched plates continue to flow seamlessly to other tables. Meanwhile, she remained forgotten, an afterthought in a space meant to make her feel welcome. Moments later, Ella returned, looking flustered and holding a tray nervously in her hands. "I checked with the kitchen," she began hesitantly, "and they said they never received your order." Sophia's eyes widened in disbelief. "What?" she asked, her voice tinged with incredulity. "How is that even possible? Liam took my order almost an hour ago." Ella bit her lip, visibly uncomfortable. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. It seems like he never put it in." The words hit Sophia like a wave. Her frustration boiled over into full-blown anger, her pulse quickening as she stared toward the kitchen doors. Liam's behavior wasn't just careless, it was intentional. She took a deep breath, willing herself to remain composed. "Thank you for letting me know, Ella," Sophia said, her voice firm. "I need you to get Liam to come over here. Now." Ella nodded quickly and hurried off, clearly eager to avoid further confrontation. Sophia's gaze burned toward the kitchen, her indignation now fully alight. Whatever was happening tonight, she was done letting it slide. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After Liam had vanished into the kitchen, Sophia felt her patience shatter. His deliberate neglect was undeniable, and she was done waiting. Rising from her chair, she placed her hands on the edge of the table and turned to Ella, who had returned nearby. "Could you please get Liam to come here?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with a sharpness that cut through the tension. Ella nodded quickly, her nervousness evident. "Of course, ma'am," she replied before hurrying off, eager to avoid further conflict. Sophia sat back down, her gaze following Ella until she disappeared toward the kitchen. Around her, other diners briefly glanced in her direction, their curiosity palpable. Sophia recognized those looks all too well. The kind reserved for moments of discomfort that people preferred to ignore. Soon enough, they returned to their meals, pretending nothing was amiss. A minute later, Liam emerged, his pace deliberate and unhurried. His expression was blank, his body language infuriatingly nonchalant. He approached with a slight swagger, as though nothing was wrong at all. That cavalier attitude made Sophia's anger surge even higher. "Is there a problem?" Liam asked, his tone devoid of concern. Sophia fixed her gaze on him, taking a moment to gather herself. She didn't want to lose her temper, not yet, but she was done being polite. "Yes, there's a problem," she said evenly. "You never put my order in." Liam blinked, his face utterly unreadable. "I'm sure that's just a misunderstanding," he replied, his voice monotone. Sophia's eyes narrowed. "A misunderstanding?" she repeated, incredulous. "I've been sitting here for over an hour. You took my order, and now I find out you didn't even bother to put it in. How is that a misunderstanding?" Liam shrugged, a move that only fueled her fury. "Look, we're busy tonight. Mistakes happen," he said, his voice still carrying that same detached indifference. Sophia felt her temper flare. "It wasn't a mistake," she said, her voice rising. "You've ignored me since I walked in. Every other table has received exceptional service, but you couldn't even manage the basic courtesy of putting my order in. And now you're brushing it off as a mistake?" For the first time, Liam's expression shifted. His eyes darkened, and his posture grew defensive. Crossing his arms over his chest, he replied, "If you're going to start accusing me of things, maybe you should just leave." Sophia's breath caught, her heart pounding in her chest. "Accusing you?" she shot back, her voice sharp and unwavering. "I'm pointing out exactly what's been happening all night. You've ignored me and treated me like I don't exist, all while bending over backward for everyone else. This isn't a mistake. It's you, thinking you can get away with treating me like this because I'm a black woman dining alone in this restaurant." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unflinching. The chatter around them died down as nearby tables fell silent, their attention drawn to the confrontation unfolding before them. Sophia could feel the weight of their stares, but she didn't care. She wasn't about to let Liam dismiss her so easily. Liam's face flushed red, and he shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not going to stand here and let you accuse me of being racist," he said, his voice tight with anger. "If you don't like the service, maybe you should leave." Sophia clenched her fists at her sides, her body taut with anger. "I'm not going anywhere," she declared firmly. "I'm paying to be here just like everyone else. You're not kicking me out because you don't like being called out on your behavior." Just as Liam opened his mouth to retort, the restaurant doors swung open. Sophia's attention shifted to the entrance, where Adrien strode in, his tall figure commanding the room. Relief washed over her for the first time that evening. Liam's complexion paled the moment he spotted Adrien approaching, his confident posture crumbling. He stood straighter, his eyes darting nervously between Sophia and Adrien, as if he suddenly realized just how badly he had miscalculated. Adrien reached their table, his expression calm but his sharp gaze fixed on Liam. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice steady yet carrying unmistakable authority. Sophia exhaled slowly, her anger simmering beneath the surface. For the first time that night, she felt she wasn't alone in this fight. Adrien's question hung in the air, steady yet commanding. His tone carried an authority that demanded an answer, and Sophia chose to remain silent for a moment, allowing Liam to squirm under her husband's piercing gaze. Liam's confidence melted away as his face turned pale, his earlier bravado completely gone. He seemed to realize far too late that Adrien was someone important, someone he had misjudged. Sophia could see the fear creeping into Liam's expression as the gears in his mind scrambled for a way to salvage the situation. But it was already too late. "Your waiter," Sophia said slowly, her voice clear, "has been ignoring me all night. He didn't put in my order, and now he's trying to kick me out because I called him out on his behavior." Adrien's eyes stayed locked on Liam. "Is that so?" he asked, his voice low but resonating with calm authority. Liam opened his mouth, but no words came out. His face was ashen, and his earlier smug attitude had evaporated entirely. He stood frozen, staring up at Adrien like a deer caught in headlights. Sophia leaned back in her chair, watching the power dynamic shift before her eyes. She didn't need to say anything more. Liam had just realized who Adrien was, and there was no escape now. Adrien folded his arms across his chest, his stance exuding quiet strength. His tone was measured as he spoke again, but his words carried weight. "So," he said, his voice cutting through the now silent section of the restaurant, "you've been ignoring my wife, haven't you?" Liam stammered, his words a jumbled mess. No, sir, I didn't. I wasn't." He glanced around the room, desperately searching for someone to come to his aid, but no one did. The other diners had turned their attention back to their meals, eager to avoid being involved in the confrontation. Adrien raised an eyebrow, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to Liam's growing panic. It certainly sounds like you've been giving her a hard time, he continued, ignoring her order, not providing basic service. And now, from what I just heard, trying to kick her out of my restaurant. Liam's face turned bright red, and he shook his head frantically. No, I didn't know she was. My wife's? Adrien finished for him, his tone sharper now. Liam swallowed hard, clearly trying to regain some control over the situation. I'm sorry, sir, he stammered. I didn't know she was. Why? Adrien cut him off coldly. Should it matter who she is? Do you treat all of your customers this way, or just the ones you think you can get away with disrespecting? Sophia remained silent, letting Adrien take the lead. She watched Liam's expression shift from defensiveness to sheer panic, his mind racing as he grasped for a way out. There wasn't one. He had made his choices, and now he had to face the consequences. I'm really sorry, sir, Liam stuttered, his voice shaky. It wasn't like that, I promise. It was just a mistake. Things got busy, and Busy? Adrien interrupted, his voice still calm but now tinged with controlled anger. You seem to have plenty of time for everyone else. So I'll ask again, what was the real issue here? Liam's mouth opened, but no words came out. He fumbled for a response, fully aware that anything he said would only dig him deeper into the hole he had created. Sophia finally spoke, her voice calm but cutting. This isn't just about the service, she said, her eyes locking onto Liam. You made a choice to ignore me, to treat me as less than every other customer here tonight. And when I called you out, you tried to turn it around and make it seem like I was the problem. Liam's eyes flickered toward her briefly before darting away, unable to meet her gaze. His entire demeanor had crumbled from smug arrogance to silent panic. Adrien uncrossed his arms and stepped closer, his presence looming over Liam, who visibly flinched. Here's what's going to happen, Adrien said, his tone taking on a sharper edge. You're going to head home for the night? Adrien said firmly, his tone leaving no room for debate. We'll deal with this tomorrow. But understand one thing, there's no place for behavior like this in my restaurant. Liam nodded quickly, his face drained of all color. Yes, sir, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Now go, Adrien ordered. Without hesitation, Liam turned and hurried toward the back of the restaurant, disappearing through the kitchen doors without so much as a glance back. The air in the room remained tense, even after Liam's departure. Slowly, the noise of the restaurant resumed as the diners, who had been avidly eavesdropping, returned to their meals and conversations, pretending they hadn't just witnessed the confrontation. Adrien turned back to Sophia, his expression softening as he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Reaching across the table, he took her hand gently. Are you okay? He asked, his voice now calm and full of concern. The anger from earlier had completely dissipated. Sophia let out a long exhale, feeling the weight of the night begin to lift from her shoulders. She gave Adrien's hand a small squeeze, her voice a little shaky as she replied, I'm fine. I can't believe how blatant he was. Adrien's jaw tightened slightly, his frustration still simmering beneath the surface. Some people think they can get away with that kind of behavior, he said. They forget that the world is changing. Sophia nodded, her voice quiet as she admitted, At first, I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but I knew I couldn't just let it slide. Adrien smiled softly, his eyes filled with admiration. You did the right thing, he said. I'm proud of you, and I'm glad you didn't let him push you around. No one should ever have to deal with that kind of disrespect. A mix of relief and exhaustion washed over Sophia as she returned his smile. The confrontation had drained her more than she realized, but at the same time, she felt a quiet strength for standing up for herself. Liam's behavior had been appalling, but in the end, he was the one who had to face the consequences, not her. Thank you for stepping in when you did, Sophia said softly. I wasn't sure how far he was going to take it. Adrien squeezed her hand again, his gaze warm and reassuring. I'll always have your back, you know that. The tension that had filled the night gradually began to fade as the two of them sat together, hand in hand. The world around them continued as if nothing had happened, but Sophia knew better. What had transpired was important. A stark reminder that even in a place as polished and elegant as this restaurant, prejudice could still rear its ugly head. The rest of the evening passed quietly. Sophia and Adrien shared a meal, the earlier event still lingering in the back of their minds. But there was no more drama. The restaurant returned to its usual rhythm, seemingly oblivious to the significance of what had just occurred. Still, both Sophia and Adrien knew the confrontation wasn't over. The real reckoning would come the next day, when Liam would have to face the full consequences of his actions. The morning sun streamed through the blinds in Adrien's office, casting long shadows across the room. Sophia sat in one of the leather chairs opposite his desk, her thoughts still replaying the events of the previous night. Today wasn't just about seeking justice for herself. It was about setting a standard. It was about making sure that people like Liam understood that their actions carried weight and consequences. Adrien sat behind his desk, flipping through a few documents, his expression calm but serious. Occasionally, he glanced up at Sophia, studying her resolve. "You sure you want to be here for this?" he asked, though he already knew her answer. "Absolutely," Sophia replied firmly. "This isn't just about you or the restaurant. It's about the principal. He needs to hear it from both of us." Adrien nodded, understanding her determination. Standing, he walked to the window and looked out at the street below, the silence between them heavy with anticipation. Sophia could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable, like the calm before a storm. A sharp knock sounded at the door. Adrien turned back to her, his eyes meeting hers. "Here we go," he said, his voice low but steady. Sophia straightened in her chair, ready to face what was coming next. Today they weren't just setting a precedent. They were making a statement. Adrien turned toward the door, inhaling deeply before calling out, "Come in." Liam shuffled into the office, looking nothing like the smug, self-assured waiter from the night before. His steps were hesitant, his shoulders hunched, and he avoided their eyes. Sophia noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he sat down across from them, his usual bravado replaced with nervous uncertainty. "Morning," Adrien said, his tone flat. Liam swallowed hard and nodded quickly. "Morning, sir," he mumbled, barely audible. Adrien wasted no time with pleasantries. "We need to talk about last night," he began, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. "You're aware of why you're here, right?" "Yes, sir." "I know," Liam replied, his eyes darting between Adrien and Sophia. "Good," Adrien said, his gaze steady. "Because this isn't just about poor service. What happened last night was unacceptable in more ways than one. Do you have anything you want to say before we start?" Liam fidgeted in his seat, his gaze briefly flickering toward Sophia before quickly dropping to the floor. "I'm sorry for what happened, sir," he muttered. The words were empty, spoken without conviction. "I didn't mean for it to come off like that." Adrien's eyes narrowed. "Come off like what exactly?" Liam stumbled over his words, his voice shaky. "I didn't mean to offend anyone. It wasn't personal. I was just busy and things got away from me. I didn't know she was, My wife?" Adrien finished the sentence, his tone growing sharper. Liam nodded quickly, his discomfort visibly intensifying. "Yes, sir. If I'd known." Sophia cut him off, her voice sharp and unwavering. "If you'd known I was his wife, you would have treated me differently? Is that what you're saying?" Liam froze, realizing too late what he had implied. His eyes widened in panic, and he stammered, No, that's not what I meant. His words trailed off as he struggled to dig himself out of the hole he'd created. Adrien leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "This isn't about whether or not you knew who she was," he said, his tone cold. "It's about how you treated her. You thought you could get away with it because you assumed no one would care. That's the real issue here." Liam's face flushed red, and he opened his mouth to protest, but Adrien didn't let him. "Stop," Adrien interrupted, his voice final and firm. "We're not here for excuses. You disrespected my wife and, by extension, this restaurant. This wasn't just forgetting an order or making a mistake. You ignored her because you thought it didn't matter, but it does." Liam fell silent, his head hanging low as shame overtook him. Sophia watched him closely, her frustration simmering just below the surface. She felt no sympathy for him, not after the way he had treated her. But she wasn't finished yet. "I want to hear the truth," Sophia said, her voice steady and unyielding. "Why did you really act the way you did last night? What made you think it was okay to ignore me, to treat me like I didn't deserve the same respect as everyone else?" Liam glanced at her, his face pale and stricken. I wasn't trying to disrespect you, he stammered. I didn't mean for it to seem that way. Sophia raised an eyebrow, her voice laced with skepticism. Didn't mean for it to seem that way? Liam, you didn't even take my order. You ignored me for over an hour while you attended to everyone else. You didn't even refill my water. How is that not intentional? Liam's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He turned to Adrien, silently pleading for help, but Adrien's expression remained impassive, his silence as damning as Sophia's words. We're giving you one chance to tell the truth, Sophia continued, her tone firm. No more excuses. Liam swallowed hard, his throat bobbing as he struggled to find his voice. He hesitated, his gaze darting nervously around the room before finally speaking, his words barely above a whisper. I didn't think you'd cause any trouble, he muttered. Sophia's eyes narrowed, her voice cutting through the tense silence. Trouble? Because I'm black, and you figured no one would care how you treated me. Liam flinched at her words, the weight of the reality crashing down on him. I didn't think it was going to be a big deal, he mumbled, his voice laced with regret. Adrien leaned back in his chair, his expression as cold as steel. That, he said, is exactly the problem. I didn't think anyone would notice, Liam muttered, his voice barely audible. Adrien's fists clenched on the desk, his knuckles turning white. And that, Adrien said sharply, is exactly the problem. You didn't think. You assumed you could get away with it. But not here, not in my restaurant. Liam's head dropped, and for the first time he seemed to fully grasp the weight of his actions. His excuses had run out, leaving only the stark reality of his prejudice. We're not done yet, Adrien continued, leaning back in his chair. His tone was steady, but his words carried a finality that made Liam flinch. I want you to come back tomorrow for another meeting. When you walk in, I expect you to think long and hard about what you've done. This conversation isn't over. Liam looked up, his face a mixture of shock and fear. Tomorrow? He asked weakly. Yes, tomorrow, Adrien repeated, his voice firm. Go home, think about your actions. We'll decide your future here then. Without another word, Liam stood. His movements were slow, his shoulders heavy with defeat. He left the room, his footsteps dragging as if the weight of his guilt had physically worn him down. Sophia watched him go, her frustration simmering beneath the surface. As the door clicked shut, she turned to Adrien, her expression thoughtful. Why tomorrow? She asked, her eyes narrowing slightly. Why not just fire him now? Adrien sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I want him to stew in it for a night. He needs to feel the gravity of what he did, to understand that he's not walking away from this with just a slap on the wrist. It'll make it more real. Sophia nodded slowly, though her expression remained skeptical. You're giving him more chances than I would, she admitted. But I trust you. If he comes back tomorrow and still doesn't get it. He's gone. Adrien finished, his voice resolute. The next morning, the tension in Adrien's office was palpable, even heavier than the day before. Sophia sat in her chair, her back straight and her eyes sharp, while Adrien reviewed a few papers in silence. Liam's fate would be decided today. Sophia could feel the weight of the moment in the way Adrien's expression had hardened. There would be no more chances after this. Liam would either take responsibility for his actions, or he would no longer have a place here. A soft, hesitant knock at the door broke the silence. Adrien straightened in his chair, his voice firm as he called, "Come in." The door opened slowly, and Liam entered, his face drawn and pale. The fear from the previous day had deepened, etching itself into his features. His shoulders slumped as he walked to the chair across from Adrien and sat down without being invited. His eyes stayed glued to the floor, avoiding Adrien and Sophia entirely. Adrien let the silence stretch for a moment, giving Liam ample time to feel the weight of the room. Sophia watched him closely, her frustration still present, but tempered by a need to see if he would finally acknowledge the harm he had caused. "Liam," Adrien said at last, his voice cold but composed. "You had the night to think about what happened, so let's hear it. What have you learned?" Liam shifted uncomfortably, his fingers twitching as he clasped them in his lap. He glanced up briefly to meet Adrien's eyes but quickly looked away. "I've been thinking a lot, sir," he stammered, his voice weak. "And I know I made a big mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly last night, and Stop, Sophia interrupted, her voice cutting through his halting apology. This isn't about carelessness or a mistake. You deliberately treated me differently because you thought I wouldn't speak up. You thought you could get away with it. Liam flinched at her words, his face flushing red. His fingers twisted nervously in his lap, and for a moment it seemed as though he might try to defend himself. But then something shifted in his expression. His shoulders sagged, and he let out a long, shaky breath. I didn't think anyone would care, he admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought you'd just sit there and take it. Sophia leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. And why did you think that? She asked, her tone razor-sharp. What made you believe I wouldn't say anything? Liam hesitated, the silence in the room growing heavier with each passing second. Sophia's question hung in the air, demanding a truth he could no longer avoid. Liam swallowed hard, the silence in the room growing heavier with every passing second. His eyes flicked nervously between Sophia and Adrien before he finally muttered, Because you're black. The words hung in the air, raw and exposed. For a moment no one spoke. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest, a mix of anger and vindication surging through her. He had finally said it. The truth was out. Adrien's eyes darkened, and his voice came out low and controlled. So you thought that because of her race, she wouldn't speak up? That she didn't deserve the same respect as everyone else here? Liam nodded slowly, his face pale and drawn. I didn't think it was that big of a deal at the time, he admitted, his voice shaky. You thought wrong, Sophia said sharply. Her tone cut through the room like a knife. You thought you could treat me like I didn't matter because you assumed no one would hold you accountable. But you were wrong. Liam shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes downcast. I'm really sorry, he mumbled. I know it doesn't mean much now, but I really am. Sophia leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms as she studied him. You're right, she said, her voice firm. It doesn't mean much. You knew exactly what you were doing, and apologizing now won't change that. Adrien leaned forward, his expression cold and unreadable. Do you understand why this can't be forgiven, Liam? Liam nodded slowly, his face a mask of defeat. Yes, sir. I get it, he whispered. Adrien stared at him for a long moment, letting the weight of his words settle in. Then, his voice came out low but resolute. You're fired, Liam. Pack up your things and don't come back. Liam's face crumpled, but he didn't argue. He knew it was over. Slowly he rose from his chair, his shoulders hunched. I understand, sir, he mumbled. I'm really sorry. Apologies won't fix this, Adrien said quietly, his eyes hard. Now go. Without another word, Liam turned and left the office, the door clicking shut behind him. The silence that followed was heavy. But this time it wasn't filled with tension. It was filled with finality. Sophia let out a slow breath, her body relaxing as the weight of the situation lifted from her shoulders. Liam was gone, and the restaurant was better for it. Adrien leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. I wanted to give him the chance to be honest, he said softly, but I knew he wouldn't make it right. You did the right thing, Sophia replied, her voice gentle but firm. He needed to go. People like him don't just change overnight. Adrien nodded slowly. I know. And this place, our place, has to stand for more than that. Sophia reached across the desk and took his hand in hers. We did what we needed to do. Adrien squeezed her hand, offering her a small but warm smile. We did. The air in the office felt lighter now, and for the first time in days, Sophia felt a sense of closure. They had stood up for what was right, and Liam had faced the consequences of his actions. As they both stood to leave the office, ready to take on the day ahead, Sophia glanced back at the door where Liam had exited. She knew there would be more battles like this, more people like him who would try to get away with their prejudices. But she also knew that she and Adrien were ready to fight them. The day after Liam's firing was quiet, almost too quiet for a place as bustling as Maison Luxe. Sophia and Adrien stood together in the empty restaurant before the lunch rush began. The soft hum of the kitchen staff preparing for the day serving as a calming backdrop. The air felt lighter now, though traces of the tension from the previous days still lingered. Sophia glanced at Adrien as they walked slowly through the dining area, her hand slipping into his. Do you think he really understood what he did? She asked softly. Adrien sighed, his gaze scanning the tables. I don't know, he admitted. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that we sent a message. No one who works here can behave like that and expect to stay. Sophia nodded, a quiet determination settling in her chest. They had taken a stand, not just for her, but for every person who had ever felt invisible or disrespected. This restaurant wasn't just a business, it was a symbol of the values they both held dear. "We did the right thing," she said again, more to herself than to Adrien. "Yes, we did," Adrien agreed, his voice firm. Hand in hand, they prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they knew they could handle whatever came next. "Do you think he's gone for good?" Sophia asked softly, her curiosity tinged with lingering unease. "He's not coming back," Adrien replied firmly. "I made that perfectly clear." Sophia nodded, knowing Liam's time at Maison Luxe was over. But a thought nagged at her, one she hadn't yet voiced. "You know," she began hesitantly, "I kept thinking about it last night. If Liam had such a problem with black people, why would he even work here in the first place?" Adrien raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I've wondered the same thing," he admitted. "It's ironic, isn't it? People like him think they can hide behind a job, a uniform, and their own twisted logic. But the truth always comes out eventually." Sophia sighed, a mix of frustration and disbelief washing over her. "It's absurd. He was working for a black man, someone who built this place from the ground up, and still thought he could treat someone like me, like us, as if we don't belong. The hypocrisy is unbelievable." Adrien's smile faded, his expression turning serious. "It's how people like him justify their actions," he said. "They think they can compartmentalize their hatred, hide it behind a paycheck or a title. But at the end of the day, it always comes down to fear." "Fear?" Sophia echoed, tilting her head. "Fear of losing power. Fear of change. Fear of seeing people they don't respect succeed," Adrien explained. Sophia leaned against one of the polished tables, her fingers tracing the edge of the silverware neatly set out for the day's guests. "I still can't wrap my head around it," she said, shaking her head. "The nerve of someone like that, working in a place built by a black owner and thinking he could look down on me, on us." Adrien smiled softly, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Unfortunately, he won't be the last," he said. "But at least here, we've set the standard. People like him won't last in our world." A surge of pride swelled in Sophia as she glanced around the restaurant. It was more than just a business. It was a space that stood for something greater than either of them individually. Adrien had built it from nothing, and together they had transformed it into a success, one that welcomed everyone with respect and dignity, no matter who they were. "You're right," she said quietly, straightening up. "This place isn't just a restaurant, it's a statement." Adrien nodded, his gaze soft as he looked at her. "It always has been." They stood in silence for a moment, letting the weight of those words settle between them. Maison Luxe wasn't just a venture or a source of income. It was a reflection of the world they wanted to see. It was a space where people of all races, backgrounds, and identities came together. And anyone who couldn't respect that didn't belong. As the staff began filing in, preparing for the day's lunch crowd, Adrien took Sophia's hand and led her toward the back of the restaurant. They passed through the bustling kitchen, where chefs greeted them warmly, and out into the small courtyard behind the building. The sun was warm on Sophia's skin, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the light and fresh air wash away the stress that had lingered over the past few days. It felt good to stand in this space, a space they had created together, a space where they both belonged. "I'm proud of what we did," she said after a moment, turning to Adrien. "We stood up for what was right, and we did it together." Adrien smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "Always," he replied. They stood there side by side in the quiet of the courtyard, knowing that while the world outside wasn't perfect, they had carved out a small space that reflected the values they held dear. Maison Luxe would continue, stronger and more resilient for what had happened. They would move forward, fighting for the respect and dignity of everyone who walked through its doors. No more people like Liam, no more silent discrimination. Only those who understood a simple, undeniable truth. At Maison Luxe, everyone belonged it.